There's something about the person who actually looks forward to November. You know the one. While everyone else is mourning the last warm evening, posting about how they're not ready, this person is quietly pulling out a wool sweater they haven't touched in months and smiling, like genuinely smiling. And if you've ever looked at that person and thought something is just wired differently in them, you're not wrong. Because psychologically speaking, something actually is. We've spent years talking about morning people and night people, introverts and extroverts, type A and type B. But there's a personality divide that almost nobody talks about, one that shapes your mood, your creativity, your relationships, and even the way your brain processes emotion. And it comes down to something deceptively simple. Which season makes you feel most like yourself? Because winter people aren't just people who tolerate the cold. They're people whose entire inner world shifts when the days get shorter. And the psychology behind that is more fascinating and more revealing than most of us realize. Let's start with something that seems obvious but isn't. Most of the research around seasonal psychology focuses on what goes wrong. Seasonal affective disorder, the winter blues, light deprivation, and all of that is real. But buried under that very valid research is a quieter finding that doesn't get nearly enough attention. For a significant portion of the population, the onset of winter doesn't trigger sadness. It triggers clarity, a kind of cognitive settling, like the mental equivalent of snow covering a noisy street. Everything just gets quieter. And for some brains, that quiet is exactly what they've been craving. There's a concept in environmental psychology called restorative environments. It describes spaces and conditions that allow the brain to shift from directed attention, the kind you use to navigate the chaos of daily life, into something softer, something more reflective. Researchers at the University of Michigan found that natural environments with low sensory complexity, think bare trees, muted colors, gray skies, are particularly effective at triggering this shift. And here's the thing, that description sounds an awful lot like winter. So when someone tells you they feel more like themselves in December than in July, they might not be being dramatic. Their brain might literally be functioning in a state that allows deeper processing, more introspection, and less mental clutter. Summer, with all its brightness and social pressure and constant stimulation, might actually be the season that overwhelms them. And I think that's the part most people miss. We've culturally decided that summer is the good season, that warmth equals happiness, that wanting to be outside and social and active is the default healthy state. But personality psychology has been quietly challenging that idea for years. There's a study from the University of Liège in Belgium that looked at how seasons affect cognitive function and emotional processing. What they found was striking. Participants' brains didn't just respond to the season they were in, they responded differently depending on their baseline temperament. People with higher levels of introversion and reflective thinking actually showed enhanced cognitive performance during the colder months. Their sustained attention improved, their working memory sharpened. It was as if winter was the operating environment their minds were optimized for. Now think about what that means. It means that for some people, winter isn't a period of decline. It's a period of activation. Their best thinking happens when the world outside slows down, and that maps onto something personality researchers have been tracking for decades. You've probably heard of the big five personality traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Several large-scale studies, including one published in the journal PLOS1 that analyzed over 1 million participants, found seasonal patterns in personality expression. People born in colder months tend to score slightly but consistently higher on openness to experience and slightly lower on agreeableness, which doesn't mean they're unfriendly. It means they're less likely to default to social pleasantries and more likely to value depth over surface-level connection. They're the people who'd rather have one real conversation at a party than float through 20 shallow ones. And if that sounds familiar, well, you might be a winter person, but it goes even deeper than personality traits. Let's talk about creativity for a second. There's a reason so many writers, composers, and artists have historically described winter as their most productive season. And it's not just about having fewer distractions, though, that's part of it. It's about what happens in the brain when the external world offers less stimulation. When sensory input from the environment decreases, the default mode network in the brain, the system associated with daydreaming, self-reflection, and creative ideation, becomes more active. It's the same network that lights up when you're staring out a window and suddenly solve a problem you've been stuck on for days. Winter, with its longer nights, its forced stillness, its reduced social demands, creates the perfect conditions for this network to do its work. And for people whose brains are already inclined toward introspection, it can feel almost euphoric. Not the loud, buzzing euphoria of a summer festival. A quieter version, the kind you feel when you finally get to think without interruption. Honestly, this one surprised me too when I first came across it, because I'd always been told that less sunlight equals less serotonin equals worse mood. And for many people, that is absolutely true. But serotonin isn't the only neurochemical that matters here. Melatonin, which increases during longer dark periods, doesn't just make you sleepy. In moderate amounts, it's been linked to enhanced imaginative thinking and a kind of loose associative cognition that fuels creative work. The brain in winter isn't broken, it's shifted. And for some personality types, that shift is a gift. Here's what gets me about this whole topic. We spend so much energy trying to fit everyone into the same model of what a good life looks like. Be social, be productive, be energized, be sunny. And when someone doesn't match that template, especially during the months when the template feels hardest to maintain, we assume something is wrong with them. But what if the person who retreats in winter isn't retreating at all? What if they're advancing just inward? There's a beautiful idea in Jungian psychology about the rhythm of the psyche. Jung believed the soul moved in seasons, just like nature. Periods of outward expansion followed by periods of inward contraction, and he argued that both were necessary for psychological wholeness. You can't grow all the time. At some point, you have to descend. You have to sit in the dark, not because something is wrong, but because that's where the roots grow. Winter people seem to understand this intuitively. They're not afraid of stillness. They don't panic when the world gets quiet. In fact, that quiet is where they find something that eludes a lot of people in the brightness and noise of the other seasons. A sense of presence, of not needing to perform aliveness in order to actually be alive. And there's a relational dimension to this too. People who thrive in winter tend to form attachments differently, not worse. Differently. Research on attachment patterns and seasonal behavior suggests that winter-oriented individuals are more likely to form deep, intimate bonds with fewer people rather than maintaining large, broad social networks. Their friendships tend to be slower to develop but more emotionally rich. They're the person who remembers the small thing you said 3 months ago, the one who checks in not because they saw your post, but because they felt something and wanted to reach out. If you're watching this and something in you is nodding, if you've always felt slightly out of step with the cultural worship of summer and sunshine and all things bright and social, I want you to consider something. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're not antisocial or lazy or low energy. Maybe your brain is simply tuned to a different frequency, one that comes alive when the world goes still, one that does its best work in the dark, one that finds depth where others only see absence. Because here's what winter actually teaches if you let it. It teaches you that not everything alive is loud, that not everything growing is visible, that sometimes the most powerful thing happening in a person's life is completely silent, completely internal, and completely invisible to everyone around them. And that might be the most winter person truth of all. The best things about you might be the ones nobody else can see. The ones that only come alive when you finally stop performing and let the world get quiet enough to hear yourself think. So the next time someone asks you what your favorite season is and you say winter, and they look at you like you've lost your mind, just smile. You don't need to explain it. You already know. If any of this felt like it was written about you, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. What is it about winter that makes you feel more like yourself? And if you've never thought of yourself as a winter person before, but something in this just clicked, well, maybe the cold has been calling you for longer than you realized.